All right. Last time we got here down to the final point in the outline of the first part of the outline of the book of Ecclesiastes, dealing with the vanity of all things in life under the sun, and started out with the points on how it is that there's a vanity of earthly wealth and honor that goes through the 6th chapter. What I want to try to do tonight is finish off where we began, or where we ended up last time in Ecclesiastes 5, and then finish 5 and go to 6, and hopefully finish that. Chapter 7 is out in the foyer. The material is all ready there. There's 3 pages, 2 of the text and notation lines, and 1 page of questions like normal. So you can pick those up on your way out. I don't know where he got that I told him for older people. I said that is what I use, is those things that are printed out. And of course, I'm one of the college-age kids, so that wasn't any older person who was involved there. All right, last time we looked at this paragraph. There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb naked, shall he return to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil, just exactly as he came, so shall he go. What profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. We pointed out that that statement that in verse 14, that but those riches perish through misfortune. I had lost my notes, and finally I figured out why. They were back on the table at my house rather than with me in my notebook. But when you look at that word misfortune, I pointed out I don't think that's talking about the sense of his son comes and spends that in a way that is unwise. The word that's used there in the New King James for misfortune in verse 14 is a word that you might notice in your footnotes as bad business if you have the outlines that were sent out for, or that were given out. If you look back in the footnotes there for that A footnote, it's bad business that is given there in a literal sense. New American Standard translates that a bad investment, or the American Standard Version through evil adventure. That's literally what it says. I thought the International Children's Bible, sometimes if you want to look at something and get something in a very simple way, but usually a pretty fair kind of a translation that takes place. International Children's Bible was done in order to bring things to about a 5th grade reading level. And most of what it has, every once in a while I've seen a problem, but very rarely. It has a statement that I really like the way that it expresses that. Then he loses it all in a bad deal. That's kind of the way we would say that. That's the sense, that there is a loss that's there through a misfortune or missed investment or something like that. That seems to be the point. So here he was, he amassed these things, but there's nothing left for him to pass on. And why would that be seen as especially, I guess you would say, humbling to a man that had gained riches in that way? Here he is, he's gotten this wealth. He has nothing to pass on to his son, so what is his son looking at him like? Why'd you waste all this, Dad? You were a failure and all of these things. The way in which that might be taken as something that is seen of vanity, it just went away, is something I think we recognize the shame that might be involved in that. And that seems to be what's pointed out here. The other of the man leaving it to a son who misused it has already been dealt with, but that's what seems to be the case here, where it's lost before that son ever has an opportunity to be there with it. Anybody got anything else there? the last paragraph that we didn't get to last week in chapter 5, here's what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun, all the days of his life which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. Okay, let's get back up here with verse 18. This always is a way of introducing something. When he's going to point out an overall summation, many times the ecclesiastical writer, Solomon, talks about something. He makes a statement, and then you'll see it translated in the English versions as a colon. In other words, a statement about what he's going to cover. Here is what I've seen. Now, why would he start out with here's what I've seen? What's that? Tell us. Okay, experience. You think anybody else had seen that? Yeah, he's calling to place something that is a common experience in life that we recognize taking place. It's good and fitting for one to eat and drink. In other words, the idea of enjoyment that is there in the food, the buying of that which we get from our labor, that we put that into things to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of his labor, that which might be general ways of entertainment that's right in and of itself. He says, in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage. The word heritage simply means that which comes from something else. In other words, the logical conclusion of it. It was the same word that they used for people who come from your descendancy, your heritage, in that sort of a way. And so he has these things that he's worked for. He now eats, drinks of them. He enjoys life from them. Is that a right thing to do? Yeah. It's a right thing to do, he says. Now, if you look at what has happened in religious movements all through time, you'll find that over and over again there are those who get a kind of a hermit mentality, that the only way you can really be right with God or righteous and do that which is according to being holy is for you to cluster yourself off over here somewhere, enjoy nothing, go through a vow of poverty, give away everything. Francis of Assisi is one who in Catholicism is an example of that. Others who did the same thing. Sometimes I think people say, well, that's the monk mentality that's found in the Catholic Church. That's true, but that's not the only place. You'll find a lot of that, really, even out in the so-called Protestant groups as well. They have some fringe people that will do that. If you go back beyond the New Testament time, you go to the time where there was the Dead Sea Scrolls that were being written down. They were hidden in Qumran area. Who was that by? You remember the name of those people? Do what? Essenes, that's right. The Essenes were very much that kind of ascetic, we call it, people. They were saying, you don't enjoy any of the pleasures of this life, because if you enjoy this life, then you're inherently involved in evil, because this life is inherently evil. That's not true. We need to recognize these things are things that are right to do. To enjoy oneself, to have that to eat and to drink of, to have the pleasure in life. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's something right with that. Now, how far does that go? In other words, how far can I take that? I'm just enjoying myself, so it's okay. That runs into what else? What other principles is that in some way limited by? Do what? Okay. Which would involve what? Okay. Some moderation in those things. How about the things that are inherently evil in and of themselves? Can I enjoy myself in that? No, that would be another thing. I'd have to look at that. So the principle can be taken to a way that is wrong. It's also limited, I'd suggest, by what we have as an obligation to do for God, in the service of God. What we have with regard to others. You remember Ephesians 5, the point that, or we made Ephesians 4, pardon me, last time about how we work to get what is good and to have something that is there for another. So you look at other principles and they have a bearing on that, but the concept of not enjoying anything or just living this kind of a suffering life all the time in order to be right with God is not a right concept. Solomon points out that is something where there is that we should use what we have to our benefit in this life. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, what does that suggest? If I've got it, who do I give thanks for? God. Because I don't say, well, it's mine because of my own things. That's already been covered in the book of Ecclesiastes as well. We understand that what we have ultimately is from the Lord, and we give Him thanks for it. He's given power to eat of it and to receive His heritage and rejoice in His labor. This is a gift of God. So if God gave me the ability to get that, and I got it by His blessing or because of Him ultimately, then who do I recognize it came from? It came from God. And therefore I give Him the thanks for it. He will not dwell unduly on the days of his life if I understand that's a gift from God. Why will I not dwell on my life under the sun unduly? In other words, put the emphasis on that. If God gave it to me, what does that suggest comes in my future? Do what? Okay, He could take it away. What else? Okay, there's a heavenly reward that's there. But what does it suggest about if God gave it to me? You remember the parable of the unrighteous steward? What happened that he ultimately had to give an answer? Master came back, right? And the point of that is what? Judgment to come. If I recognize this is from God, I recognize I'm going to God. And therefore I need to give Him an answer for what I've done. As long as somebody recognizes that, that's pretty much what the writer is talking about in the last chapter. The idea that you fear God, keep His commandments, this is the whole of man. Everything that's done, what? God will bring into judgment. I need to remember that. And helping me always understand that this life's blessings and what we go through, yes, we can enjoy self, but we will answer to God for it ultimately. And that keeps a right reference. That keeps a right control over that. Go ahead. Yeah, and there will be more about that through this, of his own failures in that way as we go through the book. Anybody else there? Go ahead. These things that God gave him and the right to enjoy. Absolutely. No, all of it. All of it. This process is all the gift of God. In the Garden of Eden, sometimes people say, I look forward to time when I don't have to work. I don't understand that. I mean, I just really don't get it with that. I don't care if I'm going to be doing something else. I'd be doing something. I'm not going to sit there and twiddle my thumbs all through retirement or something. And, you know, retirement for a preacher is when they pat you in the face with a shovel, but that's the way it goes. But those kind of things are not ones that would make me happy. God in the Garden of Eden gave man what? Work to do. It's not something that it was without that then. That's what's good for us. Know that. When somebody doesn't have that desire to work and laziness, they're only hurting themselves. And, well, they're going to hurt some others too, pardon me, but not just themselves, but they're certainly going to do a great damage to themselves. Anybody else? Okay, here we go. Number one question. What admonition does Solomon give regarding prudently coming before God in worship? This one didn't format the same way my computer at home does. What ought we to do before God? Okay. How? All right, there. The idea, draw near to God and do not let your mouth be rash. Come near to hear and not to be speaking. That's a reverence that is there. How should these cautions impact our worship today? We already covered that one last week, so I'm going to go on from there. Okay, I was afraid this would happen. What advice does Solomon give regarding vows to God? All right, be careful and do what? Keep them, all right, or don't make them, and what else? Do it with haste. The point is made. All right, what does Solomon say? Do not marvel at the matter. To what does he say that? Say it louder, I can't hear. Okay, the corruption in government. That's something only the U.S. has had, right? No, you look at that, and that's everywhere. That's the nature of the beast, so to speak. Why does a love of material wealth and things never satisfy one? Okay. There isn't an end in and of that. Things change. You remember when, those of you who are in your 60s, 70s, whatever else, there was a toy that you wanted from some year around holiday times. You still have the same desire for that toy? Well, no. I can't even remember too many toys from when I was a kid. And those kind of things change. What satisfies us at one point we think would be the best, we'd never need anything else, doesn't do it at all. I remember buying my first PC computer from Ronnie's dad, and he told me it had a 40 megabyte, no, that's not right, 40 meg hard drive. And I thought, how could you ever use that amount of memory? And now, look what we're doing. All right, what severe evil does Solomon identify? What does he identify as a severe evil? Hoarding, okay. Having that, amassing it, and not using it to any good. What advice regarding the proper use of material blessings does Solomon give at the end of this chapter? What should we do? All right. And do that recognizing who is the true giver. God is the true giver. All right. Anything else there on those? Let's go to chapter 6. Verse 1. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires, yet God does not give him power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction. Now, when you look at that of what he's seen is common among men, somebody gets riches, but another person uses those. How could that happen? How might that happen? You ever seen anything like that? Let me ask you something. Think back in Israelite history. When they came into the land, what time did they come in at? And what did they do? They ate all of the things that someone else had prepared. God gave it to them. Now, why was it that God gave it to them? Why do we know that was an act of God and His providence? What did He told them as they'd come in the wandering? Okay. All right. They came in because God wanted them to experience the riches of His blessings. He had provided for them both for an ability to sustain themselves in the wilderness, but also a sustenance that gave them an humbling. If you ate manna every day, you wouldn't want to eat the manna after a while. And that's what they had every single day. God did it to not only make them have an ability to sustain themselves, but point is made in Deuteronomy, He did that because He humbled you in it as well. Now He brings them into the land, and everything they would want is there for them to eat of, and they were able to have that. Okay, now down on a microcosm of that. Some individuals out here, and he gets a lot of stuff. He's rich, wealthy, everything else. How could that vanish from him? Somebody might steal it. What else? Bad investment we talked about a minute ago. What else? Okay, give it away. Could spoil whatever might be there. There might be a storm that would take those riches away. If you look at it in the sense of grain and fruits that had been laid up, storms would tend to take that and make that worth nothing in a very quick kind of a way as well. So all of these things are common that we've seen. Now, what happens? The other person that might enjoy them, does he have a real appreciation for that? No. If you don't sweat to earn it, you don't like it. In the end, you don't have a respect for it. And all of those other ways in which it could vanish, same sort of a way. He had made a plan. He had gotten the wealth. But now it's not there to enjoy. Those things happen in life. That's what happens in life under the sun. And we have to recognize that. That's why it's something that doesn't answer the full nature of what we ought to be about in this life. He goes on down and says that the foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction. Why an evil affliction? That man who lost it, likely what's going to happen to his spirit? What's he going to become like? Angry, bitter? Is that going to help him? No, it's going to ruin him. Bitterness is a disease that ruins whoever it is that it gets into. And that's the way in which those kind of things happens. It also does an evil to the one who gets it, who didn't work for it. Because there's a problem that comes from there of an expectation that everybody else is going to provide. Those things happen in life, and we see it today just as much as we've seen it back in biblical times. All right, anything else there? Next part, verse 3. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. For it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this has more rest than that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice, but has not seen goodness. Do not all go to one place? All right. I don't know about you, but if you told me I was going to be one that lived many years and begat 100 children, that would not be a desirable thing to me. Your standards of what was something that was good were somewhat different. How were children seen? They were seen as those who were the helpers with the things that you had. 100 children would have meant that he was someone of great wealth and ability to take care of that and helping with all of this. That's the idea. We don't get that phrase. If somebody said we were expecting another one, first thing I'd do is shoot the doctor, I think. But that's not exactly what I want of many children out there at even in an old age that would be seen in this sort of a way. But the point is, here's somebody that has much, but his soul is what? Not satisfied with the goodness. What does that mean? He's received much. All right, there wasn't any value in it. He didn't enjoy that. It's something that's a burden that he sees. Sometimes I've seen wealthy people that are like that. It wasn't something that they enjoyed. It's something that was a burden to them, and they almost became ones that were embittered by what they had because it put so many responsibilities on. Go ahead, Sherry. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yes. Let me say I'm thankful for my kids. Don't get me wrong on that. But the idea is that that's not where there's this abundance of those that are going to bring about some sign of a blessing in our society today. What you recognize about all of this, here's somebody who doesn't see the goodness in it. Therefore, what it is a burden to him rather than him using it in the right way. And Sherry's correct. It isn't in the amount that one has. It's in the idea of receiving what we receive, seeing it as a blessing from God, and then a recognition that my ultimate answer is to God. It isn't to man. It isn't to these things in the world. I need to live with those as merely a tool to help in the cause of the Lord. And that's what we do when we recognize them in a proper way. And then he talks about, indeed, has no burial. He's somebody that doesn't have a grave. That was a place to be remembered. Those kind of things are there of his continuity. Typically, you had those who were buried in some sort of a sepulcher that had been hewn out together with the family. And so there were those that were buried for many generations there and remembered in that sort of a way. Here's somebody who doesn't have that. In other words, he's just not had any pleasure in this life, not had a recognition of the blessings. Is better that he wasn't ever born alive. He says, for it comes. The it there is not it in the original language. The word ought to be he, because the word child in the language of Hebrew is here in the masculine. And the idea for it, that child that was stillborn, comes in vanity, departs in darkness, and it, or his name, is covered with darkness. Now, that's a passage that some of these who are out there in the world talking about that a child that is yet within the womb is not a person, that it is merely to be seen in an it way. I wish they wouldn't have translated it in that sort of fashion. It should have been he, because it would follow, the pronoun would follow with the noun that is masculine. Why is that child, that stillborn child, seen to come in vanity and depart in darkness? To come in emptiness, vanity, and depart in darkness. Let me suggest something to you. That's one of the passages that Catholics use to say that this child is guilty of sin. Because their point is, he departs in darkness, therefore darkness is evil. And that means this child is evil when born. Is that what this is saying? What's the context? Here's somebody who did not enjoy, did not see the goodness in life of the blessings of God. Does a child still born ever see the goodness and the blessings of life? No, it doesn't suggest anything about their personhood. If they want to know, is this child a person, all they've got to do is go to passages like with the conception of John or Jesus, and you notice the fact that she conceived and bore a son. Same thing is so of Isaac in the Old Testament. What was conceived was also what was born. Now, what was born? A son. Therefore, it was that son that was conceived. That's the point. By the way, in the New Testament, when you see that a child that is born, both with Jesus and with John the Baptist, that is, the word is tekna, which is a word that not tekna, it's brephos. It's the same word that's used of one who is a child that is under walking age. Once they were walking age, they were no longer a brephos, but before that, they are a brephos. And so the child within the womb and the child outside of the womb, both. What Jesus was in the womb of Mary, he also was in the manger. And that is a brephos. There's no distinction between the two. When you look at Scripture, the idea of one being inanimate, or not inanimate, but non-person before birth is just simply unsustainable. The Word of God's very clear in that. All right, anything else there? He goes on down in verse 5. Though it, or he, has not seen the Son, known anything, this has more rest than that man, the man who had no pleasure in the things or was not satisfied in what he receives, even if he lives 1,000 years twice. Again, that's not something I see as a real plus matter. It's a matter where you live that kind of a life and yet you've not seen goodness. Do they not all go to one place? What's the place? To the grave. Now, included in that all go to one place is who that's brought up in this? The child. You have not only the child and that man who hasn't seen the goodness, you have both of them. Now, why would a child, stillborn, go to the same place, the grave, as the person that had lived a long time if he wasn't a person at all? It's seen the end is there of a death, a grave. Therefore, there was a life that was involved as well. So when you look at that, that's another thing about this that ought to be very clear, to not sustain the place of the abortionist, but very clearly sustain the place that the Bible has for that. Anybody else on that passage? All right. Verse 7. All the labor of a man is for his mouth, and yet the soul is not satisfied. For what more has the wise man than the fool? What does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Now, don't take more out of this passage than what is being said. When you get to the idea here of the point of being satisfied. He said, a laboring man, says all his labor is for his mouth, yet the soul is not satisfied. Does that say everybody always just labors for what they can eat? No, it's talking about life under the sun again. If I'm going to work and have gain, what good is that if I don't partake of it? I don't use of it to be what would nourish me as God expected. That's the point that he's making about all the labor of man is for his mouth. But have you ever seen someone who was totally satisfied with everything that was happening in this life? Have you ever been like that? There are disappointments that are there in life. That's the nature of it. There's a recognition of that. Now, should we learn to take those disappointments in a way that we turn them into positives and to things that we recognize maybe this is a blessing in disguise? Sure, but that's not the point being made here. This is talking about just the reward of labor. In the reward of labor that we have, whether it's a fool or whether it is a wise man, they're going to have the same kind of a point. They satisfy themselves in some ways, but they're not always satisfied. Not everything is going to bring that kind of satisfaction in their life. He says, what more has a wise man than a fool? If they both have enough to eat, how's the wise man's food better than the poor man's food? Just in the sense of the food, it's not. It's that which provides sustenance, is the point. This is not something that's different. Wisdom and folly don't make the belly any fuller or emptier because of wisdom or folly. That's just the idea. That didn't have anything to do with it. What does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? In other words, if he's one who he knows how it is that he should act, specifically I think here he's talking about with respect to gaining a living, if he does that, and he does that in a way just like the wise man does, how is he any better or the wise man any better? They're not. In other words, on the physical side, what I have isn't something that is going to be affected. When I have the things to eat, I can be satisfied in that, but I'm not going to be totally satisfied. Whether I'm wise or whether I'm a fool really doesn't matter with whether I'm full if I have the same thing to eat. He's just looking at it just on that basis, and that basis alone. He says, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. What does that mean? Now he's getting to the point. To the bush. Okay, there's our little truism. How else would you put that? Okay. Yeah. Exactly. When we were first married, Leslie and I had hamburgers, hot dogs, and spaghetti. And then we had hamburgers and hot dogs and spaghetti. And when we got tired of that, we would have spaghetti, then hot dogs, then hamburgers. And it went that way because that's what we knew how to do, and it could be done within the time we had. And I thought that was the best time of my life. When you have these things, he says, you live with an understanding of being grateful for what you have, not wanting everything else. Not letting your sight of your eyes wander and say, if only I had this, or if only I had that, or if I was something else, or if I was this. Forget about that. Accept what we have and go on and use that in the way that we ought to. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. In other words, if we're always dissatisfied, always looking for something else that's going to gratify us, something's wrong. We need to really get in touch with our hearts and see what it is that is causing us to be somebody that just is bitter or not in the way of recognition of knowing that God has provided us these things. If we eat those things, they fill us up. Well, filet mignon might be better, but then you get to my age and you can hardly eat it because it just makes me sick at night. All of these things you look at what you have and you're thankful for that and go on with that. DJ, you had something. Sure. Sure. Just that isn't the thing that you're always trying to get more and more. Yeah, those expectations. Learn to be satisfied. That's good. Anybody else got anything there? Let's take this last little bit. Whatever one is, he has been named already. For it is known that he is man, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. Since there are many things that increase vanity, how is man the better? For who knows what is good for a man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? What's that getting to? This is the end of this section. How'd you put that in your own words? Do what? Okay, there you are. The idea that who can contend? He cannot contend with him. And I think it's right that the New King James translators put that capital, meaning God, who is mightier than he. Understand, you're under the oversight of God. You're in a world that he created and he controls. Ultimately, there are things that you are not going to understand. But you recognize he's the greater, he is in control. It's that which is right. Why? Because you figured it out? No, because God did it. That way, you look at this thing and you recognize where you are in relation to God. He says there are many things that increase vanity. When we look at them, there are a lot of things you look at and you say, man, that's without purpose. That's something that is unfair or whatever else there. And from our standpoint, we look at it in that way. Don't forget that God sees the aggregate. From Job's point of view, his suffering was without purpose because he hadn't done what his friends were telling him he had done. He accepted a false narrative that suffering was because of some evil. But what did God see? God saw it was a reversing of what Satan was trying to do. Job was a man who was righteous in the sight of God. He was the one that the devil wanted to take away those things and cause him to curse God and die. But God used it to his glory. God used it to give you and me a book where a man is suffering and wondering why. He never knows, but he does not sin with his mouth. How much good has Job done in his suffering through time? Job didn't think about that because that didn't come up. Everything we can see is that the book of Job was written probably a good time after he was dead. The fact is, though, that he's helped a whole lot of people. And if I only looked at that, it isn't fair to me. I haven't looked at the full story. God's the only one who can see that. So before we ever try to charge God with wrong or anything like that, we need to step back and think, wait a minute, who am I to make that charge? He's God. And I need to recognize that. And then I can recognize that the days of my life, they pass like a shadow, but they're nothing to God. He's still there. He's still seeing it all the way through. Leave things in that hand. He's the one that is ultimately in control, and he is the answer to everything about life. All right. Anybody? Go ahead, Steve. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Exactly. That's right. Contentment is something that is talked about in the New Testament, a need that we need to learn. Somebody else had a hand up I thought I saw over here. Go ahead, Gerald. Exactly. And that's where he's taking us at the end of this. He's pointing toward God, which is what's going to be dealt with. And the end of this book will clearly point to that matter. Okay. A couple of announcements before we close, and I'm going to ask Dale to lead us in a closing word of prayer. Vernon Marie's granddaughter, Lauren Peterson, it was thought she had a hole on the spine. It's now been understood that there's a mass on that spine, and it's causing some serious concern for them and the family. Let's remember them in our prayers. As JT reminded you, the class material is out there written. It's also online if you want to go there and get it in a PDF file. And also on Sunday morning, remember, first hour of worship will be our time of being together in the worship. After that, at 10 o'clock, there will be the classes that we go to and then be separated from those classes, not come together again. Go ahead. Auditorium. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Anybody else? That'll do it. So